A hiatus, and it's great to be back. And I am so great to be kind of relaunching LARP Chat Live. We have a lot coming up. And before I introduce our guest for this evening, I want to thank everybody for joining us. I'm Tara. I'm with the Geek Initiative. And I am very, very excited to have with me tonight Joe Hines from Lost Colonies Larp. Hi, Joe. Thanks for joining me.
Sure, thanks for having me on.
So tonight we're going to talk about a bunch of different stuff. Feel free to go ahead and toss some questions in Twitch. I do have Twitch loaded on my phone here, so it'll be a little bit of a delay before I can get to all of the questions, but I thank you for your patience, and I am kind of monitoring it, so we'll, see them as they happen and kind of queue up those questions for you here. So just go ahead and put those in the comment box here on Twitch, and we'll get to them. Also, this video will be uploaded to YouTube later, so we will get to see it. So to give a bit of a background about why I really wanted to have Joe on LARP Chat Live, especially for this kind of relaunch, which we do every now and then, is because initially when I heard about Lost Colonies LARP, I was like, Lost Colonies. I don't know. This sounds like it could be like a problematic game, but I'm also curious because I love historical stuff. What's this all about? And so I kind of commented on some of Joe's stuff and reached out to him. And I was probably like a little like combative almost when we first started talking, but we ended up getting along really well and kind of like ironing out a lot of discussions and helping each other a lot in LARP. And I have been doing editing for the Lost Colonies rulebook, and just turned in the end of the first edit. I did some of it live here on Twitch, but kind of ran out of time with my crazy schedule. So Joe, tell me all about how you came up with this idea, about your co-creators, and what really inspired Lost Colonies.
Well, that's a lot. I'll start with it all started on a really long road trip. Rebecca, my wife, and one of the directors, and I were coming back from another LARP, and we like to talk about things and unpack things. And on this particular trip, we went into a couple of what if scenarios. What would happen to LARPing if you did this or if you did that? And one of the topics that we ended up talking most of that ride about was the space in between combat where you're damaged from the combat and the time when you're healed. Mm-hmm. And in most fantasy LARPs, that space is very short. And so we said, well, what happens if there wouldn't be instant healing? What if we got rid of instant healing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And so on that ride, we developed the basis of the idea for what ended up being the Lost Colonies life and death mechanic, the injury and scar system. And we started talking more about, well, maybe we should start our own LARP. Maybe we should take some of these ideas that we came up with on this long road trip and see if we could do something closer to home. And we kind of took a meandering path through that. And we well, what would this setting be? And we talked about, the need to have kind of a remote location so that you had, as the storytellers, full control over the world. And it wasn't a gigantic world, it's a pretty small world, right? And so that leads to, the distant location. Well, maybe it's a colony somewhere, right? And so that kind of helped us build, the start of our concept. And then we toyed around with other things. And essentially we did collaboratively what I call, why am I carrying this rock? Where we looked at everything that exists in boffer LARPs and parlor LARPs and whatnot, and we picked them all up one at a time and said, do we need this? And we decided to throw some things away, and we decided that, yes, other things we were going to keep. Because when you're making something, you don't want to make something so new that nobody understands it, right? There's got to be stuff that there's a common ground on and a common understanding, or else you'll just confuse everybody, and they won't know how to deal with it. They won't know how to interact with it. And that was just about 2 years ago that we started that process.
That's a long time ago, and I think one thing a lot of people don't realize about LARP development is ideally it is a process that takes that long. And something to point out is, you're getting ready to launch. Your first game is what, October, right?
September.
So you're getting ready to launch, but you've been gathering feedback, you've already been doing play testing, you've already been doing some preliminary marketing, your logo is out and about. And I do a lot of marketing consultation for game designers, and they say, yeah, we're thinking about, running this game, maybe like in the fall, and they're bringing this to me now, and I'm like, no, you need to start your marketing at least 6 months before, and your development needs to have been done, play tested, all of that by then. So you are one of the few that seems to kind of be on that schedule that I recommend of, having everything together and still being able to sort of tweak the game a little bit according to your community and kind of jumping into that marketing phase. Did you develop a specific kind of like launch plan, like just like someone would do a business plan, or how did you come up with the timeline for launch?
We talked to some very smart people that have run businesses before, not specifically LARP, to some folks that have launched LARPs before. Very early on, we're like, how long is this process going to take? And they sat us down and they said, you're going to spend 2 years working on this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, no, it's not going to take. Okay, maybe you're right. Maybe it's going to take 2 years. So we were projecting out that far in advance and setting ourselves timelines that were in that 2-year time range. And then as we progressed through the development plan, we got to points where like, okay, we need to now pick some dates. We need to start securing sites. So we had established the business already. We'd gotten, the bank accounts. We gotten the business license for an LLC. All those things in a line. We went ahead and spent, I don't know, 6 or 7 weeks just coming up with the name.
Yeah, wow. It's important, though. It's really important.
Extremely important. And the name itself sets the tone so much. So we had to know what kind of LARP we wanted to do before we could come up with the name for it.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a working title for a while, and that's not what we're on. And we went, I don't know, when we did the final round of picking the name, it was probably 2 intense days in a Facebook chat of just people throwing things back and forth. And we actually ended up at the end of those 2 days with one of the first suggestions being the right one, which is Lost Colonies.
Mm-hmm. It often works that way, doesn't it?
It's funny, yeah. And you have to, while you're doing that, you're also Googling to see if those domain names are available.
Mm-hmm.
Checking to see, if this lines up with some other property, so that you don't end up with confused marketing and whatnot. Looking into things like trademark, the Patent and Trademark Office registry to see if that name is already being used in the entertainment space, where the end user would be confused, and that might prevent you from registering for a trademark. We talk to attorneys and stuff like that. So there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes in developing a LARP or anything like a business, and you have to treat it like a business.
And that's a really important point, because a lot of people are even opposed to even talking about LARP as a business. But the reality of the situation is, if you're in the United States anyway, even if you're not looking to make money on the LARP, I mean, none of us are really in this to get rich, right? We're primarily in it because we want to run the thing, and whether or not it makes money, whether or not it's a nonprofit or you keep the profits aside, you still need to always run it like a business, and there's a certain amount of that required. And it's really interesting because over the years, I've actually learned I hate running the business. I love doing all the creative stuff, so now I pretty much partner with people who have that business side down and could use the creative help.
Right.
And I think a piece of advice that I would give to people thinking about starting their own LARP, especially a campaign LARP or a large weekend-long event, is that know what kind of thing you want to do. You know, like, if you're not a business person, it doesn't mean don't make a LARP. It means, like, by all means, please, like, find somebody who, you know, can do that. So, you know, that's a definite big piece of business advice I would have. And speaking of that, tell me a little bit more about, you know, the founding members of your team, because there's two others on, like, your core team, right? And then you have a large staff.
Yeah. So the other director of the LARP, there's three of us that are the directors, is Larry Weil. And the fun thing is that Larry has a background in running businesses, and Larry and Rebecca and I actually previously ran a hobby business around board game resales called Area 42 Games. And we ran that together for about 7 years. So we've worked together as a business team.
Nice.
In a similar thing. And when we decided to start looking at running, when Rebecca and I decided to start looking at running Area 42, we reached out to Larry and said, you've got a head for business. You've been in several businesses before, some that have failed, some that have been successful. We're going to bring you on to tell us what, you know, when we're screwing things up. You're our keep us sane, keep us in check person. Mm-hmm. And he did that job fantastically. So, and of course, then Larry was responsible for getting us back into buffer LARPing. And we did that together up in New Jersey for a while. And then, so of course, when Rebecca and I came up with the crazy idea to run our own LARP, we reached right back out to Larry and said, okay, you know, are you in on this? And he signed on immediately. And then we also have several storytellers. And actually, we had some other folks that we were very good friends with who helped us initially, and then they backed out because the time commitment for them was going to be too much. They were kind of burned out on LARPing, etc. So we've already gone through and changed teams a couple of times. Mm-hmm. But we've got 4 additional storytellers on staff right now. 5 additional storytellers on staff right now, and 2 marshals signed up. And we know we're going to need some more. So we're at a staff of 9 or 11, depending on how you count right now. Mm-hmm. And we haven't even launched the game yet. Yeah, and
a lot of people don't realize that it's also normal, both in business and with LARPs in particular, to do that, to have that changing up even before you launch. Because, you know, with something like this, even for games that are able to pay their storytellers, GMs, or whatever you want to call them, it's like nobody's getting rich on it, so people, like, have to put their day job first. And I know that's something I've struggled with, right? Because my schedule right now, I just started a day job. So this morning, I finished the edits on your rule book at like 6 in the morning, sent those over, got in the car, drove to work, did a working lunch talking to Evan from the game theater about Dragon Throne stuff, because I GM for them. Went back to work after lunch, came home, ate and showered, and now I'm here.
So, and I have a day job as well, and so does Larry. So it's crazy.
What is your day job?
I'm a software engineer. Okay. I work for a company called Black Sky, and I basically am a cloud solution architect. So I help develop large-scale computer systems in the cloud. So I'm doing all the IT work for Lost Colonies because I enjoy doing that. Mm-hmm. The only thing that I've been doing longer than playing role-playing games is computers. Nice. So it's like those are my two big passions. Yeah. So that's pretty exciting. Larry does technical writing, so we've got this interplay with things. Rebecca, my wife, she's got a master's degree in chemistry, forensic chemistry actually right now. So smart people with diverse backgrounds and different opinions.
Yeah,
and the ability to strongly talk, with each other and trust each other, but have differing ideas.
And I have to say, having looked at your rule book, you're a technical and analytical and scientific bunch, and it's really different editing people who have more of a technical background versus people who are more used to like writing novels and stuff. And I have to say, I learned a lot as an editor. First of all, it was probably the most organized thing I've ever edited. Like, I was pretty happy about that. I wasn't really worried about, like, chapters and formatting and all that. It was more like, the language. and all of the key information was there in a very specific way, and that was really helpful. So I would also recommend to anybody looking to start their LARP, definitely look to work with people who have complementary skills, and that in this day and age definitely includes somebody who's good at technical stuff, especially software. So even if you're not doing a lot of what I do, which is like the more digital LARPy stuff and broadcasting things like this, it's still really important to work with somebody who can handle that, like the website and social media, and find a way to filter and funnel in communication. Because when you're building a community for a long-term campaign LARP, which I was on staff for a few years at one, that constant inundation of requests and, just even like the friendliest questions and new players who just want to participate even, it gets to be a lot. It's very constant.
There are not enough hours in the day.
Not at all. And so to have a system and to work with somebody who has a background, a more techie background, and a good way at really making a system to kind of handle that instead of looking at it all emotionally, I have found to be very helpful. And I think that's going to be a really big asset. I would like to ask, what makes your LARP different? Because I've noticed about 20 things that have absolutely fascinated me about your game, and I can't wait to get out there and try it. If I'm not out for the first game, I hope to make it to the second one, because I've seen all these different elements, and now that I hear about how you designed it and decided what do we need, what don't we need, it makes a lot more sense. But there are so many things about it that seem streamlined and unique, and I'm really curious to know about that.
So I will start this off by saying that my nature as a designer is to overcomplicate things. I'm getting some feedback from you. I don't know if you can hear that. So I overcomplicate things, and because I know I overcomplicate things, I will share every idea that I have, regardless of whether or not I think it's a good idea, with my partners. Mm-hmm. And they will tell me if it's a good idea or a bad idea, or if it's too complicated or not complicated enough. And that going through that triage step of, do we need this rock, involves a lot of that kind of stuff. So really what makes, I think, Lost Colonies unique is our death mechanic. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to kind of back into the explanation for this. If I explain it from the front, I think people get a little bit confused. So I will start with death is permanent in Lost Colonies. If you die, you are welcome to play the rest of that event as a spirit, because we understand that people don't come to LARP prepared to die necessarily, and they won't have backup costuming. Yeah. It's an emotional thing, right? That also helps us with one of our goals, which is to not be a player versus player LARP. There are some LARPs out there that have a mechanic that says that if you die, you resurrect, and you forgot the 5 minutes before you died, as a way to protect the people who went and did the killing from being immediately revenge killed, right? Mm-hmm. You don't forget anything when you die in Lost Colonies because you're permanently dead, but you come back as a spirit, so you can talk about it.
And you get some closure, which is nice for the player. Yeah.
Also, our mythology has a very spirit-based, animism-based influence. Mm-hmm. So ancestor spirits is a thing. So, of course, spirits might hang around for a little while. All right. So death being permanent, you might say to yourself, wow, that's really scary. I don't want to go to a LARP where I can die and not be able to come back. Well, what we do is we put a large space in between brand new character and death, and we let the player control that. We give the player agency over how long it takes their character to die. And we do that with this injury and scar mechanic. So it takes 7 injury points in our logic before you come out dead. Mm-hmm. And the injury points can be healed. And the way you heal an injury point is you get it officially triaged by a combination of NPC/staff members, where they will talk to you about how you accrued the injury and how you want to roleplay being injured so that you can heal it. And right now we're budgeting for 2 hours of some kind of roleplay of having this injury. Maybe your arm's in a sling, maybe you've got a big bandage on your head, or you've got a scar down your face.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is that it should be a visible roleplay cue to the other players that you have an injury that you're suffering through. And that other players will be incentivized to come up to you and go, hey, how did you break your arm? And you get to tell your story of how you broke your arm.
Oh,
because LARP is all about storytelling, right?
Right, and since you have that visual cue, it's not the usual, like, you know, pretend you just have a wound in your side and then it gets healed and it goes away and you're done.
Exactly. And I like to define things by what they are rather than what they're not, but sometimes you have to give people a counterpoint. So there was an example of something that happened in a LARP that we were trying to avoid with this system. And it was that there was a scene that happened before the LARP even started, before this particular LARP event started, a between-game scene where somebody was role-playing that they lost their hand. And so before the LARP started, they put in a lot of effort to bandage their hand up to be a bloody stump so they could come in and role-play this dramatic,
right,
well, what happened to you event. Well, in that particular LARP, somebody immediately came up to them as a healer and go, oh, you're hurt. Here, heal all wounds.
Oh, no.
And took away all of their possible role-playing for that, right? So we want to give people space to play with this being injured thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, you still might be thinking, well, death is permanent, 7 injury points, that doesn't sound like a lot, right? We're limiting you to gaining 2 injury points in any given scene involuntarily, okay? So that means that it takes at least 4 scenes for a new person to die, and there's time in between there where they can go get those triaged. So we don't expect anybody's going to die permanently very quickly. Let me add on a little layer to this, though.
Mm-hmm. What's
a scar? A scar is an injury point that you have taken and turned into a permanent injury point. You have a permanent reminder now of this thing that's happened. You know, picture in your mind the Roman legions that have been, in history where they have the new people are up front, the people who have slightly more experience are behind them, and the pure veterans are way behind them. And the veterans are all beat up and scarred, and they've seen stuff, and they've got experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a scar point, when you decide to take on a scar point, it's a permanent injury point, but it also gives you some kind of a benefit. You get permanently more powerful in some way as a result of taking on the scar. So it's like setting your own difficulty bar in the LARP. You say, I'm ready. This was an important story for me to remember. I'm going to mark this scar as a permanent reminder of this scene that happened to me. I'm going to talk about this one forever because I'm always going to have the scar on my face, or a limp, walk with a limp, or maybe I'm suddenly colorblind. We have to work out the details of exactly what that is.
You get that war story though, and it adds more to the character.
And you get something numerically of some variety, some kind of benefit on your character sheet as well, because we are going towards the buffer realm of things where character sheets are important.
Mm-hmm.
That grows your character, but you're also increasing your risk level. You're putting yourself closer to this death. And so through these injuries and scar points, you get to set your own character's story arc. There's a limit of getting 1 scar per event, right? So we expect most people will maybe get 2 or 3 scars and kind of play it a little bit risky, but still not be in that one scene you could die mode.
Right.
Okay. Now I mentioned
there's
earlier,
some player control to it.
A lot of player control to it. Taking a scar is never involuntary. It is always a player-chosen thing to convert.
That's really cool.
One more thing I need to add on top of this is lost my train of thought. Pardon me a second.
That's all right. We were discussing uniqueness, and while you're thinking, Rebecca is in the chat and did mention also having a safety officer, and I do feel like that is something that is maybe not necessarily unique, but certainly helps you stand out, which is your focus on safety, and a lot of that's preemptive. You face a lot of difficult conversations when you first made your Facebook group and first started being really active about what kind of LARP you wanted this to be. And that's a huge challenge that I took notice of, because you're combining, and this is like, here's the part where I tell you why I'm like totally into your concept. You're combining so much of this really immersive, heavy role play, like a lot of people have only seen in more Nordic inspired events. But you also have like all the best things about your, Boffer campaign LARP, and some of the structure of the rules to go along with it. And that combination, plus the addition of more of a safety culture, which is finally becoming a thing in the U.S., I think has done a lot really to stir up some interest in your game. But tell me about the controversy that you kind of encountered a little bit, because when you first announced everything and started talking to people, there were some that just weren't having any talk of inclusion and such. Tell me what happened and how you handled it.
I don't know if it was from my side, it didn't look like a controversy. It looked like a conversation. Mm-hmm. So that's interesting that you used the word controversy. But certainly, and I'll say that I became a lot more aware of this after going and watching Black Panther, where one of the characters, one of the few white characters, was called a colonizer. Mm-hmm. It was a very pointed point of the movie where all these Wakandans were upset to have this colonizer in their midst. And it made me take a pause and look at, of course, the name Lost Colonies, right? And made me do some more research into that, of course. But also, there's been a conversation brewing in the LARP communities for at least the 2 years that we've been doing the development around topics like blackface, around topics like cultural appropriation. And certainly the first thing that people brought up was, are you going to be representing Native Americans? And are you going to be doing things like smallpox blankets and kicking people off of their land? And that is definitely not our intention. It is certainly not going to be allowed in the LARP. So we did come out with a statement on colonialism that we felt was very important for us to make it very clear what the LARP is about and what it is not about. Mm-hmm. We also have a relatively short list of completely verboten topics. So that's documented in our safety rules. I don't necessarily think we need to go into it now, but we can if you want. But there are going to be some topics that are banned from discussion. They won't be allowed in people's backstories, and they won't be presented as plot. So there's, we're going to go for the PG-13 rating for the LARP. We're going to be going for definitely, a consent-based role-play system where if any player is uncomfortable with scenes, they are free to step out of those scenes without any repercussions. We're going to be using the look-down mechanic developed by, I believe that was New World Match Schola. So yeah, we've done a lot of research into a lot of what the Nordic and the American freeform safety mechanisms are, and adapted or adopted them to fit what we're going for. Did I answer your full question there?
You did. Okay. That's and you even tackled the topic that I was going to bring up, and was afraid you weren't going to be mad at me, because when I was watching Black Panther, I was also struck by how poignant it was, the use of the word colonizer. And then when I was thinking about it later, I was like, man, Lost Colonies Larp, And I was like, that's tough. But it does also kind of harken back to my original reaction when I heard about this, which was like, part of me was like, oh my gosh, historically inspired and flavored stuff is great. And also, wait, but it could also be bad,
Right.
I'm a woman in this LARP. Can I do all the things or no? So those questions are really important. So thank you so much for specifically addressing that. Yeah.
And since you brought up, I'm a woman in this LARP. Can I do all the things? You absolutely can. We are not an alternate history LARP. We're not doing American colonialism, right? We've got our own map. We
Yes.
have our own world. Where this map that's behind me is the map of Sobukand, which is where all of the player characters are going to have come from. It is not the map of where they will be playing, exploring the world. We are very much an exploration-focused LARP, puzzle solving, mapping, discovering who's been around this area, what's going on. But we want to portray kind of one of the original catchphrases we came up with was Lewis and Clark meets Tolkien.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously Lewis and Clark were exploring a land that was already populated, right? So that's problematic. So we've made sure that we're not replicating that kind of stuff because that's not right. I think
it'll actually be kind of interesting because so many of our narratives, our cultural narratives about exploration, are not or cannot be divorced from the more problematic elements of colonization. So it will be very interesting to actually see how that develops. Because thinking about history and a lot of fiction, that's not a thing that's normally done even. And I think it'll kind of add a new facet to the concept of exploration.
Well, without giving away plot secrets, we have information in the background that is very important, is discoverable, about that ends up explaining why this is very different than other real world examples.
Very cool. Very cool.
That's all I'm going to say.
Awesome. I want to get into talking a little bit about clear communication, because this is something I've noticed that that you personally and that your whole team really does well, especially having edited the rule book and really kind of seeing all of it laid out on paper. When you sat down to write the rule book, to write your core principles, and to really think about how you wanted to communicate with your community and get input, how did you develop that strategy?
Well, first I'm going to give a shout out to, I'll wait that in just a second. When we first sat down to write the rule book, we didn't sit down to write a rule book. We sat down and looked at rules that we might be able to use. We looked around at the accelerant rule system, and we had some talks with Robert, who runs those, about whether or not we could adapt the accelerant system for Lost Colonies. We were on the path to doing that for probably 3 months. And then we looked at all the things and we said, you know what, this really isn't quite what we want to do. Let's go ahead and write our own rules from scratch. So we started down that path. One thing that Larry, one of the other directors, was kind of against, because he said, writing rulebooks is hard. I said, it'll be fine. Writing rulebooks is hard. So then we talked about it some more, and we brought a couple more people into the fold for our rules team. And one of them gave us a very good suggestion, which is to go and look at the Catalyst, the Lucid Dream LARP, and look at their rules. So I got put in touch with their rules team, and they granted us permission to use their rules as the basis for our rules. In fact, they went so far as to develop an open source version of their rules to release specifically for us to use as the basis for our rules. So we took their rules then and we went through, and one thing I really liked about it was that it took me about an hour to read their rules, which is phenomenal, right? And it took me about another 2.5 hours to write a version of their rules that incorporated our unique systems, right? Now that's not all of the rules, but that was just a will this fit kind of thing. And then took that back to the team, and the team all said, yeah, this is going to work for us. So we went ahead and made the final agreement. So thanks to Adam over at Catalyst for that. And by the way, Adam's, when I approached him, he was immediately very excited about the idea. He wasn't like overly protective about things. He's like, good rules makes LARP better for everybody. So he was very happy to share that with us.
That's great. I've heard some great things about Catalyst, and that kind of leads me to another question, and another thing I like about a lot of what you're doing, which is kind of the spirit of collaboration that's sort of finally starting to take hold in our region of the United States. I use that kind of broadly because I'm a little north of you up here in Philly, but especially where I am, it used to be a very highly competitive scene. People would like shame you if you went to a different LARP and you were running campaigns. Even when I went to a totally different type of LARP in a different state, 5 hours, 6 hours away,
right.
It was still, a thing. What have you noticed about the more collaborative nature of LARP organizers? And, feel free to kind of toot your own horn there because you're doing a lot to make it happen with the Mid-Atlantic group that you founded.
I think there's definitely, the LARP has been around, at least in America, 25-ish years. And over the years, it's, we're like on the third iteration, really, of LARP scenes, if you will. And I think that these LARPs that are being developed now, with the access to the internet, with, things like Facebook and social media, people talk. People talk about them, and word of mouth is the best way to get people involved. There's a limited number of weekends. It's natural to see why a LARP might be very possessive. One of the things that I started doing when we were developing this is I started listening to podcasts about LARPs. And there was a podcast that was developed called Old Man and the Skinny Guy. And I happened to find them through a friend of a friend and started listening to them from their first episode. One of their earlier episodes, they interviewed a group up in New Jersey called Waraloga. And Waraloga, one of their big taglines is, we want to be everybody's second LARP, right? We don't want to be your first LARP. We're going to run 6 times a year. We want you to come by on off weekends. We want you to come enjoy yourself and relax and have a good time. And that was a very enlightening position for them to have taken.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I've heard great things about them, too. I still haven't gotten out there, but I've heard awesome stuff about their game.
I haven't been to them either, but, they clearly have a good attitude on their staff, and they want just people to have fun. And I think a lot of times people forget that LARP is fun. A lot of times people get into LARP and it becomes not only their hobby, but their social circle, and it turns into kind of a job.
Yes, it does. Yes,
and showing up at an event in your character becomes important to you and to other players in ways that if you have to miss, there's a whole lot of guilt that comes along with that, right? So we have kind of accidentally fallen into this mantra of life before LARP. There have been times when people have said, hey, at the last minute, I can't show up and do this thing. And they feel really bad. I can't come to this rules playtest, or I can't come to this other thing. And they let us know. And it's great that they let us know. But our response has been, life before LARP. You take care of you. And when you are ready to re-engage with LARP, we'll be here. And we'll be ready to bring you back.
That's so healthy and stable. That's
exactly.
Awesome. And I think a lot of people, that's what they're looking for. They want their hobby to provide some stability and fun and safety. So, and healthy behaviors. And so to kind of model that is really important.
Yeah, and part of it too is I was a staff member for Night Realms up in New Jersey for 4 years or so, and like I said, that's like a 6-hour drive for us. And that was good times. That was a lot of fun. Still friends with a lot of the people, but the drive became too much for us overall.
Yeah.
But when we were only able to make it every other month, it got hard to get engaged with the story many times. It got hard to make consistent friends. It did happen, and whatnot. But when you miss an event, it's hard. So one of the things that we have built into Lost Colonies is the idea that missing an event shouldn't be a bad thing. And so we're going to try to provide ways for people to have an explanation for what the character's off doing. For example, just to ease the pressure from, oh my goodness, where were you, right? That can happen. So we definitely are looking to make sure that everybody has a good time, to be inclusive, to let people play and engage with the LARP in a manner which they will enjoy. So along those lines, we're also providing guaranteed non-combat story every event. We're really, mixing up buffer and parlor LARP techniques together so that people can say, you know what, I'm not really feeling like getting hit with foam weapons today for whatever reason. I'm going to come and sit down and do some crafting or solve a puzzle or whatnot. Or they can say, you know what, I'm really here just to show up and swing this Nerf sword around, shoot some people with Nerf guns. We'll have that for them as well. So choose your own LARP, I guess, and provide the best of everything. Ambitious, probably, but we think we can do it. So
that's a great goal. That really is important. And I'd like to know a little bit more about the more parlor LARP elements that you are incorporating into Lost Colonies, because I feel like that's something that has been done a little bit maybe by a couple other LARPs, but not quite in the same way. So tell me what you mean when you say that.
I say, that there are going to be scenes that are going to be narrated with strong visuals. We're not trying to be a 360-degree immersion, what you see is what you get, LARP. I think that was one of the reasons why we diverted away from the accelerant system. They had a strong core mentality that you couldn't, for example, summon a wall into existence and just roleplay there being a wall there. You had to prop everything. You had to make sure there were props for everything. And we feel like the ability to talk about what's going on, to do that narration style things, which happens a lot in parlor LARPs, gives the storytellers a lot more flexibility in what kind of story they can tell, allows them to be more reactive to what the players are really desiring to have at that moment, and allows us to take the rails away from railroading, and allow things to be more, I hesitate to use the word freeform, but kind of
more in that direction,
more flexible,
or maybe allowing for a little bit more player agency. I guess would be
a lot of player agency, and I think that was the point that I lost the thread of earlier when we were talking about injuries. Is that word agency? Is we want to put that control in the player's hands. So other than that, we're going to have a heavy crafting, ritual exploration. Experimental crafting where you can maybe get to invent your own things at some point. And that's kind of the first key to a lot of our parlor LARP mechanics, as well as just generalized, role play, sitting around a table, talking with people, character interactions.
So tell me a little bit about maybe one or two places on that lovely map behind you, and what a character who comes from one of those places might act or look like, because you have some really unique and interesting stuff in the rule book there about those backgrounds.
So we developed this map. It was actually originally drawn this way, and we liked it better that way, so we switched the orientation. And we decided to twist things in their heads by setting this all in the southern hemisphere. So as you go south, it gets colder. And that's the first thing I need to tell people. Now, where the LARP is going to be playing is in the northern hemisphere. It's over this way. In a weather much like the mid-Atlantic of the East Coast, conveniently. So when I explain things in the map here, you'll get that things are colder down here. Another main thing that we wanted to do was make sure that there were lots of options for people to bring whatever costuming they may have already got, to lower the barrier to entry to coming to Lost Colonies. So we said, all right, well, we need to allow people to bring, clothing they might wear to the Ren Fair, they might wear to a Revolutionary War reenactment, because we're doing that kind of colonization period. So we developed the map with historically kingdoms. But the kingdoms have all come together now to make one empire. So this is the Empire of Sobukan that's behind me here. In the north, we have Holtar. And I know you were asking for a pronunciation guide, so we're going to.
Yes.
I will
Now I get
say
to hear
how
it
I
all.
say it.
Yeah.
So Holtar is one of the two big kingdoms that used to be a kingdom, now all provinces of an empire, right?
Mm-hmm.
And down here we have Sorgend. And Sorgend actually extends all the way over here to a section we call Ostsorgend or East Sorgend. This right here is Terradinium. This is actually a subterranean kingdom. So there's one city right here, and then the rest of Terradinium is underground. So the rest of this area under here, underneath this this mountain chain, is Sorgend all the way over to Ostsorgend.
Mm-hmm.
Feldland right here is a giant river, floods annually. So picture, the Nile Delta, the Nile region, or the Mississippi in the Midwest of the United States. I'm originally from St. Louis, so I think that's pretty cool that we put a big river in the middle of things. Feldland was, I'll get to that in a second. Over here, Tayen is more of our Asian-inspired culture. So if you have Asian clothing in your closet that you'd like to bring out, you might just consider making a character that comes from Tayen. Every LARPer likes pirates. We have Zeal over here, which is where if you have pirate or nautical-themed clothing from any of the medieval eras through the colonial period, you might consider making a character come from Zeal. Liber up here is our Caribbean or possibly even Pacific Islander influenced region. And then Badawa Hadir is our desert island. So if you have clothing appropriate for the desert, you might go in that region. And back to Holtar is kind of our more modern period. So Sorgend is medieval, it's Irish, Scottish, Mongol, etc. And Holtar is more maybe German, French, English, later medieval period and into the colonial period era dress. So the style of dress is based on the region your character comes from, not based on your race. Actually, we don't have races, we have ancestries. We have 7 ancestries. I have a small visual for them. I can bring out a bigger visual. Hold on a second.
Yeah, that was actually the next thing I was going to ask was that I noticed while you do seem to have different regions inspired by kind of a real-world analog culture, that you actually refer to ancestries instead of races and make a very careful distinction there.
So here's the art that we got done by the fabulous Kate May.
That is lovely.
And those are the iconic characters that represent not just the ancestries that we have available in Lost Colonies, but also the regions themselves. So I hope this comes through well on the Twitch stream. If not, there's many copies of this available on our Facebook group, etc. This character here on the left is a Mamak Ancestry. They're kind of our orc and troll inspired race or ancestor. We did start off calling it race when we started writing the rulebook, and we changed to ancestry. So if I slip up, I apologize. You can see he's wearing colonial outfits, and he's dressed as a military person. Our next character here is our Eldon, kind of our elf-inspired traditional thing. Remember when I was saying earlier, pick up this rock, do we need it?
Mm-hmm.
Lots of LARPs have elves, and they like having pointed ears.
And people, and in my experience, if you don't have one,
you're
and
not
you
a
have a fantasy element, people are going to ask for it.
Exactly.
At Dragon's Den, they didn't have elves, and now we have elves because people wanted to play them.
So this is our elf-inspired ancestry. We called them the Eldon.
Awesome.
Okay, and he is actually represents a character from the independent nation of which is not presented on the map because they actually live everywhere. The independent nation has a history of being nomadic. Mm-hmm. There is in their background that they have sworn to never own land. for a reason that is lost to time. So they're
sounds
kind
like
of
a mystery to uncover.
Sounds like possibly a mystery to uncover. So you can tell he's from the independent nation because he's dressed in gray. They can look like they can wear clothing from any region, but it has to be in a uniform gray tone. And of course, he's a smith, so he's wearing an apron over top of that, which is leather. Then this lovely ritualist here in the middle is our Fae-inspired ancestry, the Faden. And she is actually represented as coming from the Feldland. Just double checking. I forget actually which region we said her coming from right now. I know we wrote it down somewhere. This charming fellow here in the middle is the Zanir. They are our dog or wolf-inspired ancestry. And then this individual next to them is our Besad, which is a cat-inspired ancestry. They are from Tayen and from Sorgend, respectively. You can tell Sorgend because they've got the fur. Mm-hmm. This individual here is from Feldland. They're a farmer, if you will, or our iconic colonist. She's carrying baskets of fruit. And then this is our Pteridinium character who's from the underground, wearing very engineering, high-tech kind of clothing, because she is representing that we have guns and engineering and whatnot.
That's really cool. Now, can different ancestries come from different places on the map, or are they kind of tied to specific locations?
There are two of our regions that we call monocultures. One that I didn't actually mention before because it's really, really small is Cairnhandia right here. It's this mountaintop little region right there, and it is almost entirely populated by Mamak. However, Mamak also live everywhere else. Okay. Second one is Pteridinium, which is our underground, which is almost entirely populated by Erdenkind, which are kind of our underground inspired. I hesitate to use the word dwarf because we've come so far from the dwarf race, but it is our underground inspired culture and ancestry. Those two places are predominantly those two ancestries. The rest of the regions are a mixture of all of the ancestries, including the Mamak and the Erdenkind. So you can play anybody coming from anywhere. Additionally, all of our ancestries can be played by players regardless of their own skin tone. And we have a very strong no blackface rule. We actually have a rule that says no costuming will ever allow or require a player to put on full coverage makeup that mimics a natural human skin tone. So we that was one of the first things that we put into our safety rules, and that alone has gotten good reception. It's there's a difficult thing. We're doing this because it's the right thing to do. So I don't like to really toot our horn with that, if you will, because you shouldn't get congratulations for doing the right thing.
But it is important to mention because unfortunately the default is sadly still to not do the right thing or to not define it or to not come out and say, like, we've done the right thing and we're standing by that. So I'm glad you mentioned that. I think it's really, really important. And speaking of being welcoming and inclusive, I'd like to know what a player can expect when they kind of roll into your LARP for the first time. So they show up, they're ready to go, they've got their costuming, they're nervous, maybe it's their first LARP ever, maybe they haven't done a Boffer game in a while. I'm totally asking for a friend because that's totally not me at all. What should they expect?
So, the first thing that I'll say with that is that my staff, the staff of the LARP, not my staff, the staff, storytellers on up, we all play non-player characters. None of us will play player characters at all, and that's very important because my non-player character is John Quinn. John Quinn is going to be dressed in nice colonial attire. I have a red vest I'll put on this. I'll be wearing the tricorn hat. My role as that NPC, and this will be probably the only NPC that I play, is going to be the messenger. His job is to bring the new players into the game. So we have a strong new player focus. There is always a need for new players at any LARP. Established LARPs are always getting new players. And so we are focused heavily on new players. Our first event, everybody's a new player. So we are going to be making sure that there is a safety briefing. We're going to be making sure that players will go through a combat authorization training session. And if they can demonstrate that they can both take and receive buffer hits safely, assuming they want to, then we will authorize them for combat. And if anybody is being unsafe, we will remove that authorization. And that authorization is good for a year, and then everybody will have to go through it again. So a new player coming into the LARP will get training in the physical combat safety, our other safety mechanisms around pronouns and how to use pronouns safely, how to back out of a scene using hold or the look down mechanism, etc. So we'll have all of that in hand. And then they will get me bringing them into the game. And as my role, I will be introducing them to people, either other NPCs or other player characters that they should know. And I will be setting up these interactions with them so that everybody gets some immediate director level attention, and they will be able to come to me throughout the LARP and say, hey, I'm missing something. I need something else. What can I do now? And I will be able to take them to somebody who will help them.
That's awesome, because your presence, it's in-game and out of game. And right. Also, probably 90% of the things that new players want or need to know or have questions about are stuff that they could probably ask that kind of NPC in-game. They could just find out about it in-game, and that's a great habit to kind of get them into.
Yep. And as the messenger, he knows everybody.
That's awesome. I love it. I like to play, I call them kind of like embedded PCs or scripted PCs, which it's basically, because I do a lot more freeform stuff, I'm playing a PC in my own games, but my objectives are mandatory. A PC's objective, they can choose to pursue something or not if they want, because opt-in is always great. But I have like specific things to do so that I can make sure people have, their own plot. And I feel really strongly about, when you're at that director level, kind of having that kind of availability for people in that way. And not just the ability to impact, but the ability to be there and like help them along and to play that kind of character. So that's really cool and not something that everyone does.
So let me just go on a little bit more.
Go ahead.
And toot some other people's horns. Rebecca will be playing two characters because we're going to have two different kinds of events. We're going to have colony events and we're going to have out in the wilderness caravan events. Mm-hmm. And we set up this dichotomy because we knew we probably weren't going to get the same campsite over and over again. So it's really, really nice to have multiple alibis for what's going on.
Yeah.
So when we're in town, Rebecca will be playing Constance Bixby, the governor's wife, and she'll be walking around with baskets and giving people things like brownies and checking out on people to make sure their needs are taken care of. But she also helps run the colony. Mm-hmm. Larry then is playing the governor, Cornelius Bixby. Mm-hmm. So they're being married mm-hmm. In game. But when we're out of the caravan, the governor doesn't go out on the caravans. Mm-hmm. So they'll have different characters when we're out in the caravan who are serving different roles and whatnot. Whereas my character, I'll be the same in both places. So there's consistency and difference. Additionally, one of our storytellers, Andy, is going to be playing what do we call him? Well, Angela's going to be playing our field marshal. She's going to be our head military person. Mm-hmm. And Andy is going to be playing the major. And so they will also be present in both the colony and in the caravans, whereas the field marshal, Angela, is probably only going to be present in the colony. So we have this kind of shifting cast of who the staff are playing for some of the staff and not for others. But the goal of our NPCs is to drive the story forward, to help the players find the story, to put challenges in their way, to give them quests they can go on to complete their objectives. So we're really designing the scenery NPCs to drive our goals of making sure that people are being entertained.
Very cool. And this is kind of in a little bit of a different direction here, but what is probably the most surprising thing that you've learned so far about creating, developing, or interacting with your community for this LARP? What took you by surprise?
We've had players already start making costuming.
That's awesome. I know I've already started thinking about it, because I definitely want more, I think colonial inspired attire, and I have a really good coat for it. And so every time I see my coat, I'm like, oh, I know where I'll get to wear that. I don't know what I'll wear with it, but I'm starting to think about it too. So I'm glad I'm not the only one.
We have a player who wanted to come down to one of our playtests from North Dakota.
Oh wow!
I think was where she's coming from. So it's pretty crazy how far and wide things go. Can't really think of anything else surprising right now, but you meet a lot of really cool people when you're setting this kind of stuff up, and the LARP is both a small community and a niche, so you don't expect that there's necessarily a ton of them out there, but there are. But there really aren't. It's like this strange thing.
Yeah.
We went out for a staff meeting, and we met up at Andy and Evan's house, and we went out for dinner. And while we're sitting there waiting to have dinner in this this little kind of divey diner kind of thing, in walk a whole bunch of LARPers.
Well, yeah, you're LARP. In a diner. That's where you're going to find all the LARPers.
We happened to be, they had their event, when we're like, hey, here, have some postcards,
right?
So, it's kind of crazy how things go.
Awesome. Well, did you have anything else specifically you wanted to share in closing, aside from information about where people can find you and when your events are and what's coming up next?
We have a survey up right now in our Facebook group, and that we're trying to find and drive interest, and who's coming to our first and second events, which will really help us budget things. So if you're considering coming to Lost Colonies, please look us up on Facebook. We are Lost Colonies Larp. We also have the discussion group Lost Colonies Larp Discussion, and both of those places have that survey pinned to the top. So please check us out and fill out that survey. It will only take you a couple of minutes. We also have our website, lostcolonieslarp.com. We are slowly getting more content there. We've been focused mostly on Facebook as our main outreach mechanism. We have a open house photo shoot playtest coming up on June 23rd in Sterling, Virginia. Those events are posted on our Facebook group as well as on our website. If you want more details, please RSVP for that. We will have a professional photographer on site taking pictures of people in their costumes. We're going to try to have some loaner costumes available if people don't have stuff ready yet. We want to get them, for some marketing material and whatnot, because the visual really sells in LARPing. Let's see what else. We do have a Discord channel. If people, it's not very active yet, but we're going to be using that. We have forums off of our website. And we're going to be, shortly after that playtest, we're going to be opening up sales for our first and second event in September and October. So still working on the final details of a lot of this stuff, but working hard.
That's really exciting. And if I can't make it to the first one, I really think I'll be able to get to the second one. And I'm pretty excited about it. So I really want to, again, thank you for joining me. and also to remind everyone else about what I'm up to. I've got a lot going on. I keep talking about how much work I'm doing on LARP-related things, and I've transitioned my career a little bit. I'm doing a day job right now in the medical field, and then at night and on the weekends, I am fully devoted to LARP stuff, which means occasionally I don't sleep. But I've been taking on a lot of editing projects, editing rulebooks for LARP and tabletop role-playing games, including, of course, the Lost Colonies Larp rulebook, which was awesome. And I am also developing my own LARPs. I'm going to a bunch of conventions. I am the creative lead for the big LARP event over at HLGCon, which is called Pandemonium. So that's going to be in Atlantic City in the fall, so check that out. And I have a lot coming up, and I can't talk about all of it yet. It's killing me, but there's like so much going on. It's going to be crazy in the next couple weeks. I am running some more digital stuff for the game theater for Dragon Thrones. Apparently, before we even announced it, people were kind of staking out the site and were purchasing tickets before we even finalized everything. But yeah, that's happening. I am going to be running some adventures there, and I will be at Dragon Thrones, which is great. I'm going to pop up to Living Games Conference this weekend. It's almost here. And I will have some surprise content for everybody after Living Games. So yeah, check back in next week, and please do follow Lost Colonies Larp, especially on Facebook. It's a really active community and also a really fast way to get answers about any kind of questions. And I really appreciate as a future player how much input that you're considering from your community, and that's just a really good indication. So thanks again for joining me.
Thank you for having me. And just really quick, one final plug for a couple of podcasts that I'm listening to. The Old Man and Skinny Guy, Gaming Talk for Everyone, and Life Action Roleplay. They both might periodically mention Lost Colonies LARPs. Additionally, not LARP related, but currently streaming on Ending Pending. You can hear two of our storytellers, Andy and Evan, reviewing television shows that only had one series. And right now, they're reviewing The Quest, which is a LARP-inspired reality TV show. So.
Oh my gosh, Bonnie's my favorite. I still follow her and talk to her sometimes, and she's just
their first episode of reviewing The Quest, they had Paladin Jim on as guest.
Nice.
So I check out all three of those podcasts. You'll occasionally hear Lost Colonies mentioned, so give a shout out for them.
Very cool. Well, thanks again for joining me. To everybody watching, thank you so much for staying tuned and for checking out this interview. More LARP Chat Live and more news is coming. This is only the beginning. So thanks again for watching, and I hope everybody has a great night.
Have a good night.